Tony, welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining me once again.
Thank you for having me. It's
You,
great to be with you.
it's a pleasure to have you back. You've written another book, and once again, it's very, very well written. Amazing book for all the listeners and all the viewers. I'll put a link to it. It's coming out in August. The exact date, Tony, was?
The
August
6th of
6th.
August.
People can look forward to
But
that.
it's ready it's on pre-order now, so
people can get their pre-orders done. It's called Consciousness is All There Is. And it's wonderful because it's named after your podcast, which is a great touch.
yes, exactly.
I'll put a link to the podcast as well. Tony, this book is very different from your previous book, but similar in many aspects. Both of them wonderful to read, easy to read, wonderful illustrations, which I really enjoyed some of them. Before we get started, the illustrations, do you have someone who does those for you, or is that something you come up with?
Yeah, there is an illustrator. It's not me at all. I've designed them, selected with some suggestions from editors about what can be illustrated and some ideas from friends and editors, but then designed them really, and a beautiful illustrator made them.
They're wonderful. I love the one with Descartes, but people, when you get the book, you'll see it. A really beautiful book altogether. And it's behind Tony for all of those who are curious as to what the cover looks like. Tony, you start off immediately by defining concepts. Yes, there's the book right there. Immediately you define concepts. Consciousness, in our previous conversation, I asked you, the first question was, what is consciousness? And I'm going to do the same thing here, except this time, I'd like you to differentiate between consciousness with a capital C and consciousness with a small c. Floor is yours.
Yeah. The book defines consciousness as a field, so it's independent of whether we know that field fully or partially, or we experience it fully or partially. And that's something that is independent from the physical material aspect of life, or any physicality, or any physiology or nervous system. So the assumption starts with a field, like we have electromagnetic field, we have gravitational fields. So there is a field which is non-physical, non-material, and that is what we are calling consciousness. Why we call it consciousness? Because its nature is to be conscious. And to be conscious means to be aware of whatever. And so we have a range of consciousness in the surface level of experience. But the consciousness with a big C is that total field, that is primary field, that is what I define or look at as the ultimate reality. And then you have consciousness with a small case, small c, and that is all kinds of consciousnesses that are available, that our human beings are open to, that animals have, that even trees have. And I go as far as saying that even elementary particles have a tiniest, most meager level of consciousness. So that is why there is what we call a relative consciousness, which is the ability to experience parts of that field, and there is the total field. So if you say electromagnetism is a field which is beyond time and space, which is all permeating, and yet there is an electron which has one specificity in that particular field. There might be other electric charges or a combination of electrons or positrons or whatever that lead to some other aspect of the electromagnetic field. This we can write with a small c, like that.
It's great that you slowly touched on that, because my next question was going to be, how does consciousness explain concepts such as space, time, or matter within your framework?
Consciousness is beyond space and time. So again, it's really nice. You're wonderful to talk to, Devin, because you really get it right and get the sequence correctly, which is wonderful from my perspective, of course. But I'm sure all your listeners appreciate that in you. So this field, therefore, is it within time and space or not? And the definition of this field of consciousness with a big C is that it is all permeating, it is beyond time and space, which means this infinite consciousness, which we can call the absolute consciousness because it doesn't change, it's always equal to itself, is not limited in time and space. So for it, which means that consciousness, there is no sequence that happens in time, and there is no space that separates objects that appear on the surface that are real in themselves, but they can be experienced as being real from different perspectives. So that makes it a little bit more complicated to think about, but it's really very simple. And how consciousness, this field, leads to the emergence of space and time, and therefore objects that we see on the surface, is really on the heart of the question that this book, Consciousness is All There Is, addresses. As we've discussed before, Tevin, in your podcast, and also we had two podcasts together, and as you also look into reality from different perspectives with other scientists and great philosophers and thinkers, we know, just to remind your listeners and our listeners and viewers, that there is the physicalist perspective that says everything starts from physical energy material, and then consciousness emerges as a byproduct or phenomenon of an orderly, complex functioning of a nervous system. This is one idea about reality. Another idea is the duality, which says there are two things that are different and somehow they interact. We don't know how, but they interact like that. And then, as you nicely put my title, the title of our talk with you, that you called it, I think, extreme idealism. There is the idea that actually consciousness is a primary, and not only primary, it doesn't create anything other than itself, but it appears as the physical universe. And so that is what Tevin liked to call extreme idealism, for good reason. I like to call it monistic idealism, which means there is one entity only that is at the source of everything. And then this entity appears as matter, appears as physicality on the surface. And that is the big question of how does it appear? Because I'm not the first one who talked about potentially idealism. You know, Plato talked about it, the Advaita Vedanta even much before, the Tao, Confucianism, philosophers have thought about it, you know, Leibniz, Spinoza, Schopenhauer, and many, many others we can mention. And more scientists today, they talk about panpsychism and the consciousness of the universe and all of these things. But this really goes back, and I have been talking about it since the 1990s as being trained with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who is an Advaita Vedantic person who also promoted that consciousness is all there is. What was remaining to solve in terms of the problems of you know, the hard problems that connect mind and body, physiology and consciousness. So there is what they call the hard problem of consciousness, because if you say, well, matter is original and or physicality, the physical energy then leads to consciousness, the problem is to explain how something non-physical, apparently non-physical, comes from the physical. Now, the challenge that we have, those who believe in idealism, which means consciousness is primary, is to actually explain how this consciousness appears as matter. And that's, you know, I'm still asking your question and trying to go into it, which is, you said it in a few words, but I like to kind of dissect it a little more. So there are two things in the appearance of matter. There is time and space, and so you beautifully put it in the same one compact question. Why time and space emerge, and then how objects appear to be separate, humans and others, every object that we see, and they appear to be as they appear as physical entities. So this is really the heart of the book, but although the book talks about the applications of that, and it has a very practical applications, but one has to understand the theory behind it. And so this is what I addressed as a main problem, which means the challenge of the hard problem of what I would call physicality, which means how physical matter can emerge from something non-physical, to compare it in analogy to the hard problem of consciousness, which means how consciousness can emerge from something that is physical. So having said that, it's a story which is very interesting. And starting with consciousness, the way I see it, and I explain it in the paradigm, is that consciousness has a nature. It has its nature. That's why we're calling it consciousness. And its nature is to be conscious. Its nature is, that's why we're calling it consciousness. And to make a long story short, it is conscious of itself because there is nothing else than itself in all possible ways. What does it mean? It's conscious in itself in an infinite number of ways, in a small way, in a big way, in a minimal way. And that is what defines the range of consciousness, that consciousness as a field is infinite and unbounded, but as it reflects on itself, guided by its own nature to be conscious. Again, that's why we're calling it consciousness, because its nature is to be conscious. And when it is conscious, it's conscious of something. And that thing is itself, but still there is a subject, an object, and the process that connects the subject to the object. So there are flavors that arise in consciousness. And again, to make a long story short, it is conscious of its ways in all possible imaginary ways. So at the beginning, and this is the starting point, we have a consciousness that is reflecting on itself in an infinite number of ways. And it is like an author who is conscious, and we all are aware that we can imagine things, and we see that fictitious entities, objects, animals can be created. You can imagine a unicorn, you can imagine a Greek god or goddess, or you can imagine yourself flying in the air, you can imagine yourself being on the moon, you can imagine anything you want. So consciousness is very fertile. And as a human being, we can imagine all these things. We can imagine the matrix, we can imagine anything we want. And therefore, consciousness has that ability to play on itself and play with itself and imagine things that actually don't exist. They're not there. You know, you imagine a unicorn, you can imagine a unicorn. You can imagine a 1,000-headed corn, animal or whatever. It's all imagination. So the theory goes, the idea goes that this consciousness has an infinite imagination, because even us as humans, we have such a fertile imagination. Why can't this field of consciousness imagine an infinite number of ways of being, an infinite number of ways of interacting, of looking, of behaving, and all of that? So all of these are still imagination. So it's an important point in our discussion, a transition between what I call unmanifest, non-manifest, virtual, and then manifestation. And in the unmanifest, therefore, the non-manifest, the just virtual, the just imagination, there is all possibilities. Why? Because that's by definition, it's an infinite consciousness, and it is able to imagine anything.
Tony,
so it can imagine.
Continue there.
Yeah.
Would you mind, for the listeners who don't understand? I think the one thing that I enjoy about us having this conversation again, it's been a while since our previous one, by the way.
Yeah, right.
I've been homeopathically exposing myself to more idealism along the way. Obviously, speaking to more people along the way. You, Bernardo, Donald, a lot of other idealists in the field who are growing the philosophy in various different ways. has allowed me to understand it better. And maybe that's why. So excuse my ignorance if I called it extreme idealism. I didn't mean that in an offensive way, by the way.
No, that's beautiful. It is extreme idea.
But I feel like at this point I've grasped the concept a little bit better, and it allows me to perhaps hone in the questions a lot better as well. Before you continue, you mentioned manifestation. I would like maybe for you to define the canvas of manifestation for everyone, just so they get a deeper picture of what this is, and then you can move forward into explaining the concepts. Because the one thing I find quite difficult for most idealists to explain to physicalists is that it often gets caught up in a religious dogma sort of area on its own. It's not that they're talking philosophy. It's more, it almost gets caught up into religion, and it's not intentional. It's just because they're so deeply associated and linked. It's linked to meditation, for example, or transcendental meditation. And that's a problem, because it's a very philosophical idea. You're giving lots of explanatory power to the theory, and it therefore deserves to be taken seriously as a philosophy. And I'd like to paint that picture clearly for people listening.
Beautiful. Yeah. So if I understand well, we've talked about unmanifest, yes, non-manifest, which means the field, and it's looking at itself and it has an imagination of all possibilities, but nothing is there yet manifesting. It's all virtual, right? So what is manifestation? Manifestation is what we see as objects, our universe, the Big Bang, the evolution of the universe from, the inflation or non-inflation, whatever theory that is, the appearance of the different fields of, gravitation, electromagnetism, weak force, strong force, and the quantum fields, and then the collapse of these into particles as the universe cooled down, and then the particles coming together to create atoms, and atoms coming together to create molecules, and molecules coming together to create bigger objects, planets and stars and whatever, and then the evolution of what we call life, unicellular organisms, and then plants and animals and humans, and all of that. They are what I'm calling manifestation. So manifestation is what you see. And what differentiates manifestation from the unmanifest is actually one very important thing, and that is time and space. Why is that? Because within manifestation, things are separated by space or by time. So as a few seconds ago, because everything is constantly changing. And it is not the same as another individual because they are separated by space. So there is Dr. Tevin and there is Tony and Dr. Tony, and they are two individuals. They're separated by space, and space localizes things, and that is the foundation of the manifest universe, where things appear as collapsed into specific objects. Now, what is very interesting is that if you go deeper into the manifest universe and get to the smaller particles, they actually there are in a gap almost between unmanifest and manifest, because when you get to the quantum fields, a particle becomes delocalized and has a wave function, which is a probability of existing almost anywhere, but more some places, less than other places. And then the problem that physicists are facing is how does it collapse, and what makes it collapse into one entity that is localizable in time and space. Okay, that's the canvas, that's the overview of what manifestation is. I haven't still said why and how these two are correlated, but it's good that you have, zoned on this and said, what's the difference between the unmanifest? The unmanifest is, let's call it an imaginary reality. You are an author, you imagine a unicorn, it's only in your imagination, it's virtual, that's what I'm calling virtual, but it's there as an imaginary thing. Nobody has ever seen a unicorn, maybe no unicorn has ever manifested. So that is the difference.
When you look at modern science and physicalist theories, what at this point do you find most frustrating about the inability of these theories to explain the hard problem?
Well, it is difficult to explain how consciousness as a personal, individual experience that is not a physical, material, measurable entity arises from something purely mechanical as the interaction of physical matter with physical matter. And the other problem of the physicalist is, where does the energy come from? When does it start? Where is it going to end? What's the limits of the universe? What happens after we reach the edge of the universe, if there is an edge of the universe? They give you theories and logics and all that, and different dimensions and things like that, and you are in a sphere and you keep rotating around it. But it's just when you come to common sense, it's really not explainable. Where this energy comes from, we can't tell. How does it end up with consciousness? There is no way you can figure this out, and nobody has figured it out. I'm sure you've been with, they talk about the, microtubules in the brain, and then you can say, no, it's impossible, quantum mechanics. You can say anything, quantum field theory, okay, but it's still something, energy, physical. How does it bring consciousness about?
And then at the same time, in terms of idealist theories of consciousness, do you find that whose theories of consciousness can you think of align with yours very similarly, maybe not the same, but most align with yours? And which idealist theories do you find problematic? For all those who don't know, Tony and I also did a wonderful episode on my show, on his show, sorry, on pros and cons of different theories of consciousness, and I'll put a link to that as well, just as a by the way.
Yeah, I still feel, there is a gap in of course, for the physicalist. Now you're asking me for the idealist. So, for example, I had many talks with all the people you mentioned, as you probably know. And when you say, how does the manifest emerge? They tell you it's a matter of fact. It is there. That it appears as it is. So when you ask the why question, there is no answer. And when you ask the how question, also there is no answer. And so all the idealists throughout the ages have never explained fully the connection between this unmanifest and the manifest on both levels, on the level of how and why. So we remain without meaning to things, without sense of things, except when you get to what we call supernatural things, which means, as you mentioned beautifully, religious kind of feelings, that there is some force which we can't understand that is supernatural, it is divine and all that, and therefore it can do things that we cannot understand. And that is not very convincing to science and not very convincing to logic. Why can't we understand it? Oh, it's beyond our imagination. And so, okay, for one, it could be, I'm not saying it's not, but it doesn't satisfy me. And so what I'm saying is there is a logic. There is actually a logic where we can understand the laws of nature when we put consciousness as a field and explain the sequence of all that there is and why it manifests, which, by the way, between parentheses, we haven't yet discussed. I'm sure it's coming up in your question, but we are still, putting the platform on which we will build this transition between the unmanifest and the manifest.
Just on a side note, Tony, David Lynch wrote your foreword for the book, and I'm a huge fan because I've one of very, very wonderful person and producer. I'm curious to know, how did your relationship with David come about? What was that like?
Well, we both practice transcendental meditation, and he's, passionate about his personal experience and how he saw the effects of it to his friends and people who learn transcendental meditation. He has met Mahesh Yogi, and worked with him. I have met Maharishi and worked with him, and we got to know each other, and we have the same understanding. And he was happy to see that I wrote this book that actually makes the sequence clear and puts consciousness in a very mainstream platform and make idealism comprehensible, understandable, and logical, and puts together converging evidence that can make us think, well, at least it's something worth thinking about. It's not some esoteric, crazy idea that relies on some angels and divine hidden forces that we can never understand.
Yeah.
So I want to really say this again. It's all understandable, natural. We can explore it. It's based on laws, based on a logic. It has empirical data that supports it. It has logical data that supports it. And it has explanatory power about the most important things in life. Sometimes I'm told, why you go there? Why you want to go there? And why do you not go there? Because isn't the meaning of life important? Isn't the freedom and destiny and inability to choose or able to make decision important? Isn't why we suffer? We suffer. It's something we carry. We have situations. Why are we there suffering? What is going on? Should we always say, well, we don't understand, let's throw it on to some divine person sitting somewhere, with everybody has their own understanding of what that divine person is? Some people think that divine likes them only and doesn't like other people. Some think that divine has a mood, get upset, can make you do things for no reason. It creates something out of nothing in a way that is very mood making kind of more or moody kind of thing. And I'm not to criticize, of course, belief systems and religion and all of that, and I don't want to go there even. You go depths, you can find actually explanatory power in what I am presenting that gives substance to religious beliefs, to deep spiritual beliefs, without having to depend and rely on, phenomena that are incomprehensible or that appear to be unfair or unjust or based on, haphazard decisions.
Yes, it goes back to what I was discussing earlier, when oftentimes the idealist theories of consciousness tend, even panpsychists, tend to be labeled incorrectly into these pseudo-scientific or religious dogma, but it's not necessarily the case. And you provide a lot of citations along the way for each chapter at the end of the book, which is very cool. So people, if they want, they can look at the chapter at the end, check the references out. It's quite nice that you did it in that way. It makes it a lot easier for a reader to want to do some further reading. Now, within the book, you bring up something called the consciousness paradigm, and I also saw online you did a lecture on it. What made you come up with this term, the consciousness paradigm?
Because it's a theory in a sense, and I don't want to make it a belief system. It's not. This is one thing. And it's a paradigm that has powerful explanatory power, great explanatory power on all these levels that we mentioned, without having to resort to incredible exceptions and difficult things. So it obeys, the Occam's razor, important point in the most extreme way. Why? Because it's the absolute simplest thing you can ever imagine, which is consciousness is all there is. It's the simplest thing. And from that thing, you have to derive everything else without creating exceptions and complications and additional things, this but that, maybe maybe the angels come and they have their own mood and not. We don't go there. We just don't go there. So the simplest idea about the one thing that we are absolutely sure about, which is our consciousness. That's where Descartes comes, you know. It's like if there was a devil that is making me believe that everything is wrong, and I know everything is changing, and I know I dream, and I know I can dream of all kinds of unusual, crazy things. And so the whole universe can be gone completely as an imaginary thing, and there is nothing that is for sure existing because the physical universe is always changing. There is one thing I am sure about, that I am conscious. That's therefore the simplest starting point. The problem with humans is they want to deny consciousness to anything that is not human.
Yes.
Well, they can deny human consciousness to a cat, but they cannot deny the consciousness of a cat.
Yes.
They cannot deny the cat's consciousness to a tree, but they cannot deny that tree has consciousness. What do you know? How do you know? All you know is your consciousness. And the rest, as when I, then come together with all my colleagues, idealists, the rest is a creation of this machine that is the nervous system, that appears to be a physical machine that has its own limitation, but that actually creates the world. This is where, Donald Hoffman, I had a discussion with him. This is his big thing about, like, we are creating something, and what we are creating is not what's really ultimately there in its entity. And this has been supported by physics, that when you go to the quantum mechanical level, it's not the classical universe. Yet what I'm saying, and what is, I think, one of the beauty of the paradigm, that's why I call it a paradigm, is that it explains and doesn't deny these layers of reality. It accepts them on their level and gives an explanation how and why they exist on their own level. So it's a paradigm because it's not a belief system. It's a theory that you can only prove through converging evidence. It explains many things. It means it's in the right direction, and it's not, based on too many hypotheses. It's very simple, and therefore it's an offer as a paradigm for discussion and philosophical entertainment, and coming to the ultimate truth. How close can we get to that?
And I think Occam would be very pleased with that simplicity within all this perceived complexity. When we have this conversation right now, we're in a certain state of consciousness, you and I, and you've found a way to almost categorize different states of consciousness at this point. With your theory, you're able to say what level each higher state of consciousness might be. Let's say you're talking about cosmic consciousness, transcendental consciousness, unity consciousness. Do you want to perhaps build this up for us and explain how each of these are linked and how you came about with this thought process?
These higher states of consciousness, which we call higher states of consciousness, are from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and the tradition of Vedic knowledge, through those people who have experienced higher and higher consciousness in their life. I can summarize them in the following. There are three normal states of consciousness. We forgot the altered state and, medically induced state through anesthesia, or, altered states, or coma, or vegetative state, and all that. So these are abnormal states or unusual states of consciousness. Normal states of consciousness is sleeping, waking, dreaming. That's what everyone goes through every day. And they have their own physiological changes. When you sleep, you have physiology, electroencephalography, the brain waves. They are different than in dreaming, than in waking state. And then what we have found, it's not me, Dr. Keith Wallace did his PhD thesis at UCLA, and he found that when people transcend through meditation, they have what we call a fourth state of consciousness. And that is a hypometabolic alert state, which is not the same either physiologically or experientially than dream, sleep, or waking. Why? Because you are very, very rested. You transcend, you go beyond the surface level of the mind, go to a deep level of restful state, very, very restful, yet hyper alert, which means very awake. And that is judged by reaction time, by ability to do things, by also the brain activity, the electroencephalographic activity. So that is why we tend to call it a fourth major state of consciousness. That state of restful alertness can become more and more present with you even during activity. So when you are awake and active, you can also have a state of completely inner settled state. So here you have like a dual thing, two things. Not that you are schizophrenic or psychotic or anything, but you are very rested inside. So this quiet inner being, and we all can have this experience, even people who don't meditate. If you have slept well during the night and feel very fresh, you are more calm inside, and that gives you a taste of being able to deal with things from a restful state, not being shaken by anything. So if you take this example to its extreme level, where you are not shaken absolutely by anything, and you are completely stable inside, yet you are acting dynamically on the outside, that is also a different state of consciousness. And that's what we call cosmic consciousness. Now, this cosmic consciousness can rise to a point where you start understanding more and more the activities of the universe, of what's going on, you broaden your awareness, and we call this a higher state of cosmic consciousness, or elevated state of cosmic consciousness, or greater state of cosmic consciousness. And that leads to ultimately finding that you are the ocean that we spoke about, the ocean of consciousness, and everything else is also the ocean of consciousness. So once you come to the realization that you are that ocean and every other thing is also the ocean, appearing as different entities, this is where we call it unity state of consciousness. So there is the ocean, there are the waves, they're limited. That is your normal state of consciousness, usually. Now, the waves start thinking, oh, I am the ocean. That is cosmic consciousness. The wave knows it is the ocean, or transcends and knows I am the ocean for a few minutes. That is transcendental consciousness. But when it really is established there and never lose that reality, then that's cosmic consciousness. Unity consciousness is when the consciousness expands and says, every wave is the ocean. Every wave is myself. I am the ocean. I appear as a wave, but every other wave also is the ocean appearing as different waves. We call it unity because now you see yourself in everything. You see yourself as the ocean in every aspect of manifestation.
You've got a nice, in the book, you've got a nice illustration that depicts that. I think it's with the girl and the tree, and looking at each, and then you slowly show each image going down from transcendental to cosmic to God to unity, which I found pretty cool. At that point, I was curious to ask you, to reach these higher states, you've got methods. We've got these practical methods, and you refer to these as technologies of consciousness, which I really like. To sort of show that this is a practical application of what we're doing with our minds. In terms of transcendental meditation, that's obviously one way we can reach these higher states of consciousness. But we're both medical doctors, and I'm always curious to know, when someone is perhaps psychotic, or if someone is on an LSD trip, or psilocybin, whatever sort of a altered state of consciousness, does that fall into the third space, or rather then going on to the fourth, or because it's now an altered state of consciousness? Or did you say the third was just the
waking state?
Waking state and comas included as well. You said anesthesia.
Yeah, these are like altered states and medical states, abnormal
Would that
states.
also then include a psilocybin trip or LSD trip, or would that go into some sort of a transcendental state?
Well, they can. The thing is, what do? They give you a glimpse. So people who are searching, they could get these glimpses, but unfortunately, it's happening in a in an artificial way, and it kind of jerks the nervous system, but gives you an impression of what it could be like. And that is so attractive that people want to do it again, of course. And they, unfortunately, in most cases, they get habituated. And since it's a jerk on the nervous system, as we know medically, there is addiction and there are problems, and it doesn't lead to creativity. Whereas what we have seen with transcending and transcendental meditation is that the changes happen very gradually, and the experience is very real, very soft, and the people come out very productive, very creative, participate in society, their health improves, their behavior improves, their intelligence even improves, their productivity, their creativity improve. So all these phenomena happen in a natural way, even if the experience can sometimes be having some similarity between, taking some, shocking something on the nervous system versus gradually raising the nervous system and preparing it and allowing it to lead a healthy, happy, productive life.
Have you found that other flow states, for example, someone maybe immersed in their music and or performing some sort of art that allows them to enter the state as well, and it is sort of a training mechanism or a technology of consciousness in that regard?
Yeah, music is wonderful. Dance is great. Interactions, loving, caring, devotion. So, if we bring this back to the yoga systems, there are different approaches to rise in consciousness. And in the yoga, you have a devotional part, which is part of yoga, and taking you out of your small self and giving you an opening to a bigger understanding, a bigger self that help you grow in more and more unity. People who think about the world, about, unity of life and human right or whatever different ways, or by religious feeling, your responsibility to others, they are also growing. So it's not only that field. And there are, people who were declared saints and great people who suddenly had an experience, a great experience in their life. If you say, for example, St. Augustine, he was walking on the field. He was completely not believing. It's his mother who was very religious, and he didn't believe anything that she was saying, didn't want to do anything with it. He was a philosopher and a thinker, a great mind. And one day he had just an experience, and that experience awakened him. And he said, what is it all about? If I can have this experience, I have a meaning to my life. It doesn't matter what philosophy is and what thinking is, but this experience, which for him was a divine experience, a divine revelation, said, now I have a meaning. And so, yes, I want this. I want this. And so he became involved in religious things and became a big teacher of the religion, the Christianity in this case. So people can have these experiences. The question is it systematic? And now we're talking about a scientific way. That's why we call it a technology. So there is a way to get these experiences. They might not be flashy, or they might be very flashy. And when you see people, like you mentioned David Lynch, and how he experienced and what he experienced, it was really like a revelation, like a moment of epiphany. I discovered something which is make life worth living. It just discovered the absolute, this unbounded ocean of pure being in a healthy, happy, natural way. And so when it's systematic, when it's repeatable, when it's reliable, we say it's a technology, it is scientific. It's not left to, one day I get this and it works this way, the other day I get that, it works another way, or, I'm waiting for it to happen and life goes by and doesn't happen again. So that's why we have a technique. But otherwise, of course, all that we do, we learn from. A moment of love, a moment of connection with somebody is a divine spiritual experience and help you to grow. Why? It leads you to greater unity. That's what love is. Love is to have more sense that the other is as dear to me as myself, which means what? Which means you feel unity with that person. And so the whole meaning, the whole purpose of existence, actually, as I define in the book, is to reach that sense of unity where you understand you are the ocean and everyone else is the ocean. And that is really supreme awakening.
It's amazing because it's so much like in South Africa, we've got a saying, it's called Ubuntu, and it means I am because you are. And it's pretty
Beautiful.
much, that sums it up perfectly. It's this, and I think that's the one thing that's very appealing about most idealist philosophies, is that the practicality behind it and the ethical principles that come from it usually tend to be a lot more positive and bring people together in a much more peaceful manner, which is something we touched on the last time. Those practical aspects of a theory are really fundamental. And you start this book off by even asking why does consciousness matter? This is why, because the significance of the practical outcomes is quite high. This is something we cannot deny. I mean, if you really believe that certain things work in a physicalist mindset and have certain predetermined outcomes, you're going to act in a certain way that plays that out. And then you go further in this book afterwards to discuss free will. So do you want to perhaps move from practical outcomes into the discussion of free will at this point?
Yes. Free will is in this paradigm, because we call it paradigm. And again, I want to comment a little bit on what you just said, which is wonderful. And that is that even on a pragmatic level, to have the theory is better than to have another theory. So this is one more thing, it's like...
Yeah, it makes it a much easier sell.
Right. So, it's better to have a world in which you believe in this theory than in which you believe in, only physicality. Because only physicality and materiality leads to the problems that we are facing in the world today, because who cares, spiritual values are not necessarily there, or, in the name of spiritual values, you kind of do horrible things. So I don't want to get there, but even on a most practical level, to have such a theory leads to a better universe and a better world and a better evolution and a better future. But we're not saying this is true just because of that. And so now I go back to your question. You want to say it again so that maybe those who are...
Well, I mean, you've touched on the practical aspect of it. Is there anything about the ethics of the theory that you'd like to discuss further before we move on to free will?
Okay. The ethics is where you say what is good, what is bad. And we don't have a real reference other than, I mean, this has been discussed philosophically a lot in terms of the categorical imperative, in terms of do unto others what you want them to do unto you, in terms of the importance of being good so that there is a society that is created and there is evolution and there is better for our common life and all of that. So that is different angles which have different, practical values, pragmatic values, etc. But they don't answer what is good and bad on a fundamental level and why this is so. And the good and bad and the paradigm I present are based on even the simplest principle of how the unmanifest manifests, which we have not fully covered yet, and why it manifests, and what happens in the evolution of life. So to answer the question without trying to go too much detail into these points, except if you want later to bring them up. You want me to do that already?
I think it'll make it a lot easier for people to understand where you're coming from.
Yes. So then now we're coming to the key question. Why this unmanifest, which has all possibilities within itself, because it contains all possible imaginations, which means we are all in its record. We are all available there because all possibilities are there. You know, we are talking today, we could have been talking tomorrow. Both are possibilities and both are there. One will become virtual, one will become real, maybe none become real, some stay virtual. You know, it's all possibilities. That's what I want to start with. Now, why would that ocean of being, that pure consciousness, which has all possibilities within it, why would it manifest? Why would anything manifest on the surface level? That is a key question. And that also doesn't have to have any exception. It goes back to the nature of the field of consciousness, which is to be conscious. And to be conscious means to know itself, to experience itself in all possible ways. Now, in this virtual ocean of imagination, I'm using imagination so, you know, we know what virtual means. Imagination of all possibilities, it knows itself to be unbounded, infinite, and it sees all of these possibilities from its own perspective as an unbounded, infinite field. What is it that it does not know? What is it that it does not experience? And that's a big question. Why, if you put it in religious terms, which I don't want to, but it helps to kind of, as a metaphor analogy, why would God bother create the universe and get us to suffer and go around? Isn't God all perfect, all having everything, and everything is there? You know, but it's not a religious question. I'm putting it this way to highlight the spontaneous, actually, emergence of what we just called manifestation, which means being localized in time and space. Why would that even happen? Why? Because of the nature of consciousness. What is the nature of consciousness? It's to be conscious. To be conscious in all possible ways, okay? In the unmanifest, it is actually conscious in only one way. The infinite potentiality of all possibilities, looking at itself from an infinite point of view that are virtual. What is it it doesn't know? What is it it's not conscious of? What it is not conscious of is how to be conscious from a limited perspective. Mm-hmm. So it can imagine Tevin and Tony, but it knows they are imagination. It's like the author can imagine us, but it's an imagination. Yeah. What the author doesn't know is what it is like to be us. What it is like to be a tree, what it is like to be a bat, what it is like to be a cat. It doesn't know. It can imagine them, but in order to know what they are, it has to hide itself from its infinite knowledge or infinite possibilities and put itself in the shoes of a particle, an atom, a molecule, human
almost
being.
Like it's almost like a sacrifice of it's almost like sacrificing certain knowledge and access to information in order to become that experience.
Exactly. It almost sacrificing. It's hiding. I don't like to call it sacrifice because it actually enjoys to know from these perspectives. And what it also enjoys is to see those perspectives rise from very limited to higher and higher perspectives, and ultimately go back to the goal where you actually go back to yourself. It goes back to itself.
Yes.
Okay, so
once it reaches unity status once again, it's almost like This is it's like a loop effect kind of thing, going back to the top.
Exactly. You know, going through the whole thing and imagining all of this. So what is required then? What is required for it to have this kind of experience? It's required that it hides or forgets what it is. So in a sense, uses nothingness, uses the field of non-existence of consciousness to some extent, but existence of consciousness to a limited extent, completely hide that. And the second thing is allow that entity to exist at its own level. What does it mean? If this, let's say, atom or molecule, whatever, is known to be infinitely connected with everything else, and it knows that, then it is no more an individual. It's no more knowing from an individual perspective. It is still knowing from a holistic collective perspective. So now it's hiding and it's giving individuality to the object. This is where time and space emerge. Space, therefore, is the separation between one entity and another that gives the impression that they are two completely separate entities. Whereas, of course, in essence, they are all that same ocean appearing as different waves. But you want to see things from the perspective of the wave. You are the ocean, and you see things from the perspective of the ocean. Now, I'd like to go up and see what it is like to be on the wave, and even forget who I am. Forget within the wave who I am.
And then, Tony, with this framework, then this is I don't think this is covered in the book. I don't recall it, but I'm not sure. Do you feel
it is covered?
No. What it probably is. Do you feel that, let's say, past maybe past relatives, people in the past, time and space technically wouldn't work in the same way within this context, but those who existed prior, because this is one unbounded experience and this consciousness is one, is there some sort of access to a past mind? Is there some sort of access to previous consciousness? How do we access it? And is this even a logical question?
Yeah, the thing is, it's still the same point, why does it manifest? It manifests in order to experience from an individual kind of perspective. If you have access to all your previous experiences, let's say a past life or a past mind or a past thing,
okay, then it nullifies,
and you know the whole story, then you're no more that one specific entity.
Okay, so it defeats the purpose ultimately. So
exactly. The other thing that deceives the purpose is if you force it to act in a special way. Because then it's no more an individual. And that's why freedom is a necessity for manifestation. This is where freedom comes. Now, freedom doesn't mean don't obey laws. And freedom is not the same across the whole range of consciousness. So an atom or a molecule or a particle, they have very limited degrees of freedom. As you grow up in the scale, you get higher and higher degrees of freedom. But at the same time, you build constraints. Why? Because there is a law of action and reaction. And now we have to explain why there is action and reaction. And this I go through in the book also. On the same basis, simple paradigm, you can explain why there is action and reaction and why it's necessary that there is always action and reaction. Okay, but now we are branching, so I want to keep coming back. So now you have freedom. This is how freedom emerges. But every time you make a choice, there is a reaction, and that creates a constraint. So that's what I call in the book constraints that you build from growing. So the more you are higher level of consciousness, the more you have accumulated constraints, but the more you have freedom also, and higher degrees of freedom. That brings us back to good and bad. What is good? I'll just define it. And, if you want to read more about it, because I don't know, time will not allow us to go in great detail about everything. What is good is what leads you to unity consciousness. What is bad is what takes you away from unity consciousness. This is completely simple. And it's based on the simple paradigm, the simple logic that we started with. We're not inventing anything new. Whatever gets you closer to unity, which is why, do unto others what you want to do on yourself, is a completely universal guidance in all religions, in all philosophies. Why? It means just grow in unity, and that is good. Whatever, takes you away from that, for example, stealing is thinking the other is different. This is mine. This is not yours. You're not acting in a sense of unity. You're acting in a sense of diversity and separation and dividing and hating the other or killing the other and all of that. And that brings you into the bad spectrum. And bad and good are on a spectrum also. So you can have bad, you can have good, you have better, you have best, you have highest good. So when you look at it from this perspective, that which is lower in the scale can look bad, and which is higher can look good. But if you are much lower, then that can be good, and the other can be bad. I hope I didn't confuse everybody.
It makes complete sense. So then, I mean, Tony, we're living in this world. I know we're a bit struck for time. Are you still able to indulge?
Yes, I'm happy. Of course, of course.
We're living in this world right now. I mean, it feels like we're the most diverse and divided we've ever been. It's particularly when you're looking online. How do we address these challenges? I mean, the book goes into great detail of providing us ways to do this. But from your side, how do we really guide ourselves through this process where we can become united and experience this one? I mean, become the I am because you are.
This is not going to happen only on the intellectual level. Intellectual understanding of what we're discussing is great. But ultimately, when consciousness narrows down, and this is part of the protective mechanism, which is very good, we have to fight or run away. And therefore, our consciousness narrows down. We become conscious of our own identity, the identity of our group, the identity of our tribe, the identity of our whatever we associate ourselves with, even as individual. If your group is threatened for your survival, you've identified yourself with a group, and therefore your group has to be like this. So you react in a way that is not based on broader, wider consciousness. And this really, we see it in the brain. When somebody is under stress or fear, the blood flow stops going to the parts of the brain that are in the cortical area and the frontal area, which are global thinkers and thinking widely and easy, and goes to the limbic system, which is lower there. And you see that, and the amygdala grows, and then the whole nourishment of the blood is for fight or flight, and like that, which means you really have not using your full potential. You're not using your full brain when you are under stress and strain. That's why generally countries, when they have attacked or something, they take their time to analyze and think and try to think about it from a calm, collected mind. So intellectually, we can say all the good reasons, and people know. We all talk about, be friendly, be happy, be nice, be human. We are one humanity. We've been saying this. I mean, you have the, League of Nations after the First World War and United Nations, that this war will be the last war because we are crazy to do war, and let's come together and love each other. It doesn't work. What you need is to expand your consciousness. And to expand your consciousness, you have to transcend, which means go beyond those smallness, the limitation, the narrowness, and the experience within yourself that you are the ocean. And then you wake up, and then you find all the good logical reasons why you should do the right thing and not do the wrong thing, from a spontaneous level of being, not of being forced or being obliged or being afraid of some God or some people or some, law. You do it out of your internal spontaneous understanding, greater understanding of who you are, not intellectual, but on the level of existential understanding. And so you feel at peace when you feel at peace with yourself. So the solution to the world, and we have also done research that shows that when a small group of people practice transcendental meditation together, and its advanced techniques, that leads to reduction in crime, reduction in violence, reduction in hospital admission, reduction even in infant mortality, which are separate and independent things, but they are due to what we call collective consciousness. So we haven't talked about collective consciousness. Just in brief, the collective consciousness is the sum and average of every individual's consciousness. Yes. However, different levels of individual consciousness contribute differently to the collective consciousness. Those who are diving to the ocean, they can create harmony and create balance in society, which is much greater than somebody who is stressed and strained and limited in their awareness. And so we have done 116 research studies, many published in peer-reviewed journals, that show that collective practice of the program can lead to changes in society. And that's why I have called a course in end of December, January in India, in Hyderabad, where we had 10,000, 11,000 people come from 139 countries. And we practiced this program together. And in the United States, they balanced with 2,000, about 2,000 people, because that is about the critical number for the United States. And now we have inspired people to create these large groups, which we will see, I'm sure, like other experiments that we have done, that we can really resolve the problems from the level of consciousness. So the paradigm has this very real effects. It's not just pragmatism and theory, but it's also science and research and findings that support it.
It must be very exciting because, I mean, people see the collective consciousness all the time. And when people see those experiments where they get people to guess the number of sweets in a jar, and it's always the average number of everyone's guess seems to be the closest number to the actual amount in the jar, because that's what happens. You get enough people together, enough conscious minds together, they're able to produce an effect that's completely different from our separate, or when we think in a bit of a diverse manner. But I was going to actually touch on the fact that you did this 10,000 plus meditation group. How exciting that must be to do. And this is one of those techniques of transcendence that you're doing on your own. So if you want to just touch briefly on the work you guys are doing, your foundation, what you guys are up to, just so everyone knows and can reach out and perhaps be a part of it.
Yeah, we'd like all those who are capable, all well-wishers, all those who have, contacts in governments or to wealthy people, to look into that. It costs very little and its effect is tremendous. And the worst that can happen is that individuals will be happier, healthier, stronger. And if there is no social effect, so okay, you tried something, So what we are up to is both on the individual level, inspiring people that consciousness is important, that you can develop it, that there is a technology to develop it, and it has implications on all aspects of your personal life. But what we are more and more, of course, now putting our attention on is the collective level, because we feel the world really needs it. And there is a need of awakening from many, many perspectives. There is conflict and division that can be resolved, but there is also the challenges of, for example, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, the environment, and all of that. And all of these are rising, and in particular, artificial intelligence. is rising, and it is going to be a wonderful tool, a very great availability for humans to use and to benefit from, except that if we don't rise in our consciousness, if we don't work like a humanity, if we don't think together and be together as you have described, we will be overcome by artificial intelligence, who will, unfortunately, I'm sad to say, will look at us as less than intelligent, to say the least,
Yeah.
and therefore might feel that we are making wrong decisions. That is one aspect, and can dispose of us, or can, use us, or can get rid of us. If, these are science fiction kind of things, but they are really more and more real. And if you would look at it carefully, it is not fiction, it's for real. So what is needed here is to raise our collective consciousness. In particular, for example, if we start using artificial intelligence as an arms race, where we use intelligence to destroy because we think that's the best way, based on the materialist, physicalist paradigm, that everything is physical and material, therefore who cares if I destroy the whole group of other people as long as I survive. Why? Because, there is no reference to life or meaning of life, or what is good and bad, or the decision-making and responsibility. Then we are moving artificial intelligence to be a very dangerous use. And what is needed is not intellectual understanding, because you can have all kinds of logic that, okay, I am now being threatened, so what should I do? I need to know faster how to destroy the other, how to take their resources, how to do this and that. And that is, living on this physicalist perspective. Whereas a consciousness-based perspective requires us to raise our consciousness, broaden our awareness, be more inclusive, know that we can benefit from everyone else, our humanity, and therefore then artificial intelligence becomes a tool rather than, becomes our master, and ultimately the one who get rid of us or something like that. So we are working on raising collective consciousness. We are working on inviting and inspiring people to try this, try it. It has no side effects, only side benefits, even if it doesn't work. And we don't want their money, we don't want anything. You can do it. We just give you the technology. And that's our word in the arena of our world today.
And it's a beautiful project altogether, and you're right. I mean, there's not going to be any side effects. Perhaps if someone sits for too long, then it just gets a bit of a cramp. I guess that would be the But for the most part, they're probably going to leave there much better off. Tony, anything about consciousness is all there is, or your idealist theory of consciousness that you feel that you haven't expressed prior to ending? Would you like to this is the floor is yours, to just mention anything you felt that I might have misunderstood, or that you'd like the audience to make sure they understand?
I think you are absolutely amazing. That's why it's a joy always to be with you. It allows me to go through all these phases, and even in a systematic, sequential way. Nothing really comes to mind, except that just to summarize, everyone is an unbounded field of consciousness in their depths. Even though they have their specificity, they are different, and differences are not here to be used as reason for conflict. The sap in a tree is the same sap that creates the trunk, the branches, the leaves, the flowers, and the fruits. They are different on the surface, but they nourish each other and uphold each other. So every one of us should know that they are that infinite ocean of consciousness, and that we can be different. We can have different qualities under different circumstances, but we have the same deservability when we are in tune with ourselves and with that ocean of being. And it's everyone's birthright to live their full potential and know that they are supreme within themselves, even if on the surface level we have different functions, different utilities, different activities. That's not what counts. What counts is your consciousness, your awareness, how you live your things, how you experience them. And that is really important in terms of priorities in life. And I think consciousness development is the highest priority.
Tony, that's absolutely beautiful and very poetic. But to all those listening or watching, read the book and you can see you'll still see the poetry and the beauty behind it, but there's a lot more of a systematic approach behind it. And I love the way you formatted the book in a scientific approach to explain something that most people don't see in a scientific way because of the beauty and all that comes with it. I'll give you a promise, Tony. I haven't meditated in quite a while. So my promise to you is after this podcast is to actually go back to it and try and get back into some sort of meditative state and give Transcendental meditation a try, a better, more focused attempt.
I am delighted. No drop of transcendence is ever wasted. Love is ever wasted. So that will be
that's my promise to you. Thank you so much, Tony.
Great.
It's a pleasure chatting to you. And I admire the work you're doing. We're both doing this, exploring consciousness in different ways. And it's always a pleasure to chat to someone who's as passionate about this topic, if not more.
Thank you, Tevin. You're amazing.
You're amazing.
Take care.
Thank you so much.